My name is Nathan, and I should have never gone back to that forest. 3 years ago, my brother Matt went missing in Raven Pines, a dense, isolated forest known for swallowing hikers whole. They searched for months, no footprints, no torn clothing. Nothing. It was like the woods had erased him. Last month, I returned. Not for closure, not for answers. I returned because I saw him. It was late, a storm rolling in, and I was driving past the forest when something caught my Aja figure standing just beyond the tree line, tall, motionless, watching, and even through the rain-streaked windshield, I recognized the jacket, the same one Matt had been wearing the night he vanished. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering. My brain screamed that it wasn't possible. Matt was gone, but my body moved before I could think. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the trees. Matt. My voice barely carried over the wind. The figure turned and walked deeper into the woods. I followed. I had to. The branches clawed at my jacket, the undergrowth swallowing my footsteps. The flashlight flickered as I pushed forward, his shadow moving just beyond my reach. Then, he stopped. I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat. Matt's back was still to me, his head slightly tilted, like he was listening. "Matt, it's me." Slowly, he turned, and I saw his face. Or rather, the lack of one. There were no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin stretched too tightly over bone. Then, it smiled. A mouth split open where there shouldn't have been. One, wide, unnatural, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The flashlight died, and the forest erupted into whispers. Not one voice, dozens, hundreds. I ran, blind, desperate. My lungs burned as I tore through the darkness, branches whipping at my face. The whispers followed, slithering into my ears, my mind. Then, suddenly silence. I was standing on the roadside, my car's headlights illuminating the trees. The forest behind me was still, too still. I barely made it home. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, told myself it wasn't real. But last night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my window, and when I looked out, there was a figure standing in the tree line, wearing Matt's jacket. My name is Lucas, and I should have listened to the warnings about the hollow tree. Every town has its legends, and ours was no different. Deep in Blackwood Forest, there was an ancient tree, older than anything else in the woods. People said it was cursed, that anyone who looked inside would never be the same. I never believed it, until the night I did. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, me, my girlfriend Erin, and our friend Kyle. We set up camp near the river, just a few miles from where the tree supposedly stood. It was Kyle's idea to find it. "Come on," he grinned. "How often do we get to prove a legend wrong?" I hesitated, but Erin was curious too. So, we grabbed our flashlights and followed the overgrown path into the trees. The forest felt different. That night, the air was thick, heavy. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. No wind, no animals, no sound. Then, we saw it. The hollow tree. It was massive. Its bark gnarled and twisted, like something out of a nightmare. A hole gaped in its trunk, too round, too perfect, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Kyle grinned. "I'll go first." Before we could stop him, he stepped forward, shining his flashlight inside. The second he did, he stopped moving. His breath hitched. His grip on the flashlight tightened. His whole body locked in place. "Kyle," Erin whispered. He didn't answer. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. Then, before I could react, he turned and ran. Not just ran, sprinted, straight into the forest. "Kyle," I shouted, but he didn't stop. We chased after him, our flashlights bouncing in the dark. The trees closed in around us, twisting, warping. The ground felt wrong beneath my feet, like I was stepping on something that wasn't entirely solid. Then, the whispers started, soft. Right behind us, not words, just laughter. Aaron grabbed my arm. We need to go back now. But Kyle was still ahead, running deeper into the trees. I forced myself forward until I saw him. He stood perfectly still, his back to us, facing another tree. His own shadow stretched toward him, reaching. Kyle, I stepped forward. We have to leave. Slowly, he turned. His eyes weren't his anymore. Dark, hollow, empty. Then, in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "It sees you now." The next thing I remember, Aaron was pulling me, screaming. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached camp. Throwing ourselves into the tent, zipping it shut like that, could somehow keep it out. In the morning, Kyle was gone. The police searched for weeks. They never found him. But sometimes, when I drive past the woods at night, I see a shadow standing between the trees, and I swear, it looks just like him. My name is Daniel, and I learned the hard way that some parts of the forest are never meant to be entered. Last autumn, my friends and I, Megan, Tyler, and Josh, decided to camp near Blackwood Ridge, a remote area known for its eerie fog. The locals warned us about it. They said the mist moves on its own, that people who walk into it don't always come back. We laughed it off. We weren't laughing the next morning. The first night was cold, but normal. We built a fire, told ghost stories, and joked about the warnings. But at exactly midnight, the mist rolled in, thick, unnatural, silent. It moved like it was alive, slithering between the trees, swallowing everything in its path. The fire dimmed, as if struggling against the fog's weight. I could barely see the others, their outlines flickering like shadows in a dream. Then we heard it. A low, guttural howl. Not a wolf. Not a coyote. Something else. Something wrong. Tyler laughed nervously. "Okay, that's creepy." Josh frowned. "Maybe we should." Then Megan screamed. We spun around, but she was already gone. Her flashlight lay on the ground, its beam cutting into the mist, but there was no sign of her. No sound. No struggle. Just gone. We called her name. Again. The mist swallowed our voices. Then the howling came again, closer now, circling us. "Run," Josh shouted. We did. We bolted through the trees, but the mist twisted the landscape. Paths shifted, trees loomed where they shouldn't be. The trail we had taken earlier was gone. Then we saw them, figures in the fog, tall, thin shapes standing motionless between the trees, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, their arms too long, their fingers twitching. Then they moved, a blur of motion, a flash of pale skin, something whispering inside the mist, voices that weren't ours. Tyler tripped. I grabbed his arm, yanking him up just as the mist closed in around where he had fallen. We ran until we couldn't anymore. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the mist stopped. We were back at our camp, gasping for air, but Megan was still gone. We searched for hours, called for her until our throats were raw. The police combed the area for days. No footprints, no signs of struggle. No Megan. Just the mist. Waiting. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in at night, I still hear the howling. My name is Jake, and I haven't been back to the woods since that night. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip, me, my girlfriend Emily, and our two best friends, Ben and Lisa. We had done this a dozen times before. Pick a secluded spot, set up camp, tell scary stories by the fire. But this time, we picked the wrong place. The first sign that something was off came just as the sun was setting. We had set up our tents in a small clearing beside an old hiking trail, one that didn't appear on any of our maps. The trees around us were too tall, their branches weaving together like twisted fingers, blocking out most of the sky. "I don't like this place," Lisa muttered. "Feels wrong." "Come on," Ben laughed. "It's just trees." But Lisa wasn't the only one who felt it. There was something off about the air. Too still. No wind, no rustling leaves. Even the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, were missing. Then we found the footprints, just beyond. Our camp, deep in the dirt of the trail, were bare footprints. They were long, narrow, and fresh. "Who the hell walks barefoot out here?" Emily whispered. We followed them for a few feet before they suddenly stopped. No turning, no sign of a struggle. They just ended, like whoever left them had vanished, into thin air. A chill crawled up my spine. "Let's go back to camp." That night, we barely slept. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps circling our tents. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I could see the shadow of someone standing there. Then, in a voice that sounded like Emily's, it whispered, "Come outside." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Emily was asleep beside me. Then the footsteps continued, moving toward Ben and Lisa's tent. A moment later, I heard Lisa scream. I tore out of the tent, flashlight in hand, just as Lisa stumbled out of hers, shaking, eyes wide with terror. "Ben's gone." We searched the entire clearing, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. His bag, his shoes, even his flashlight were still in the tent dot. Then Emily pointed at the trail. The footprints were back, only this time, they were Ben's. Leading into the woods, we followed them, calling his name, our voices swallowed by the oppressive silence. The footprints led us deeper into the trees, twisting and turning until we didn't recognize where we were anymore. Then, they stopped, just like the others. They ended abruptly. No sign of struggle, no blood, no clue where he had gone. Lisa started sobbing. Emily clutched my arm. "We need to leave. Now." Then we heard it. A whisper. It came from all around us, like the trees themselves were speaking. "Come outside." The same voice that had whispered to me earlier. The same not quite human tone. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the car, speeding down the dirt road like something was chasing us. We called the police. They searched the woods for days. They never found Ben, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That voice. "Come outside." My name is Ryan, and I know now that some places should never be explored. It was supposed to be just another camping trip. My brother Jason and our cousin Olivia. We grew up hiking these woods, setting up camp near the river, telling scary stories by the fire. But last summer, we wandered too far. We had planned a 3-day trip deep into Ravenwood Forest, a place notorious for lost hikers. People said the trees were too dense, that the paths shifted, that compasses didn't work right. We thought it was just superstition. We were wrong. The first night was quiet, too quiet. The wind barely moved through the trees, and even the insects seemed muted. Olivia noticed it first. "The woods feel wrong," she whispered. Jason rolled his eyes. "Come on, it's just the wilderness." But I felt it too. A strange pressure in the air, like we weren't alone. The second day, we found the carvings deep in the woods, carved into the bark of an enormous oak tree, were words. "He watches." Below it, tally marks. Dozens, maybe hundreds. "What the hell?" Jason muttered, running his fingers over the grooves. The air around us felt heavy, charged. I turned, scanning the trees, my stomach twisting. "Let's keep moving." That night, I woke up to the sound of branches snapping. I sat up, heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long shadows. Olivia and Jason were still asleep, but something was out there. Then, I saw them eyes high in the trees, glinting like animal reflections. But they weren't right, they were too high, up too still, and there were too many. I grabbed Jason's shoulder. "Wake up," he groaned, rubbing his eyes. What then? He saw them too. We both froze as the eyes moved, not blinking, not swaying, just descending, as if whatever they belonged to was crawling down the trees. I shook Olivia awake. "We have to go." She barely had time to process before we heard it. A voice, low, distorted, echoing from all directions at once. "You shouldn't have come." We ran. We didn't bother packing. We sprinted through the trees, crashing through branches, breath coming in ragged gasps. The path twisted, unfamiliar, the trees closing in around us. Then Olivia screamed. Jason and I turned just in time to see Henslum, skeletal fingers reaching from the darkness, dragging her backward. She clawed at the dirt, her eyes wide with terror. "Help me." We lunged forward, grabbing her arms, pulling with everything we had. And then she was free. We didn't look back. We ran until the trees thinned, until the morning sun painted the horizon. We never spoke about it after that. Never told anyone what we saw. But sometimes, at night, I wake up gasping for air, heart hammering in my chest, because I still see them, those watching eyes in the trees.